My name is Ryan, and I just turned 34 last month. I thought by now I'd be building a future with the woman I loved, raising kids in the dream home I spent years working to buy. Instead, I stood in a courthouse watching her walk away with everything: our $4.8 million mansion, the furniture, even the dog. When the judge slammed that gavel, it felt like he'd nailed my coffin shut. I was left with nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and a half-empty bank account. My wife, or I should say my ex-wife, smiled as she walked out arm in arm with her lawyer, and her mother, who always said I wasn't good enough, smirked like they'd finally proven their point. But what I didn't know was that her father, quiet, almost forgotten, was about to hand me an envelope that would turn the tables on all of them. I used to believe in hard work, in sacrifice, in the idea that if you built something brick by brick with your own sweat, it couldn't just vanish. But I was wrong. The gavel came down in that cold courtroom, and with it, my life was split clean in two. My client will be awarded sole possession of the marital estate, the judge said flatly, as if we were reading the weather report. The estate. That was their way of saying the $4. $8 million mansion I spent 15 years of my life paying off, fixing, improving, and making into a home. Now it belonged to her, my ex-wife. I stood there numb, while she sat across the room with that smug little smile. The same smile I used to think was charming when we first met. Now it was venom. She didn't even look at me when the judge confirmed the ruling, just leaned over to whisper something to her lawyer and laugh. When it was over, I walked out with nothing but a thin manila folder of legal documents and a stomach that felt like it was caving in. She walked out into flashing cameras, her mother at her side, the two of them celebrating like they'd just won a championship. In a way, I guess they had. The whispers started almost immediately. Friends, coworkers, even distant relatives. Did you hear? Ryan lost the mansion. Ryan's wife took everything. Guess she was right about him not being enough. People don't realize how loud whispers can be when they're about you. And then came the social media parade. Within a week, she had redecorated the mansion and posted photos online. New designer furniture. Pool parties with her friends. Smiling selfies with the caption, "New chapter, new beginnings." Each post was another knife twisting deeper. I'd scroll through them late at night from my rented one-bedroom apartment, the kind where the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbor sneeze. I'd stare at those pictures of the mansion, the house where I thought we'd grow old together, and I'd feel humiliated, like the entire world was laughing at me. I stopped going to certain bars, certain restaurants because I couldn't stand the pity in people's eyes. I stopped answering phone calls because I couldn't take another "man, I'm so sorry" from coworkers who went home to their intact families in their intact homes. I felt like I had lost more than property. I'd lost my dignity, my worth, my place in the world. And the cruelest part was knowing she was out there, basking in victory, while I sat in silence, abandoned by everyone who once called me family. But what I didn't know was, not everyone in her family agreed with what she did. Looking back, maybe I should have seen it coming. The truth is, my wife's family never wanted me. From the very beginning, I was just a contractor. That was her mother's favorite phrase. She'd say it with that little scoff in her voice at every family dinner. "Oh, Ryan, you wouldn't understand, you're just a contractor." Never mind that I owned my own business. Never mind that I worked 16-hour days to build something from nothing. To her, I was beneath them. And my wife, she didn't defend me, not once. She'd smile, sip her wine, and let her mother chip away at me piece by piece. Her father was different, though. He never joined in on the cruelty, but he never stopped it either. He'd sit at the head of the table, silent, distant, like a judge who'd already handed down his verdict. A raised eyebrow, a nod toward my wife, and the message was clear. She's the chosen one. You're just lucky to be here. At those family dinners, I was invisible. The spotlight was always on her. Her new job promotion, her new car, her latest vacation with friends. Every toast, every compliment, every ounce of approval went to her. And me? I was the guy refilling glasses, the guy cutting the turkey, the guy everyone forgot was in the room. I should have known. I should have recognized that when a family builds one child into royalty, they'll always need someone else to be the servant. But I ignored the signs. I told myself it didn't matter. That love was enough. That building a home together was more important than where her parents placed their approval. I told myself lies because it was easier than facing the truth. In that family, I would never be seen as an equal. And when the divorce came, they proved it. Her mother gloated, her siblings celebrated, and her father, like always, said nothing. Just watched me lose everything, his eyes giving nothing away. That silence haunted me more than the insults. Because sometimes silence means agreement. And sometimes silence means a secret you're not supposed to know. I thought I was done with them forever. Done with the dinners, the whispers, the judgment. But I was wrong. A week after the divorce, I got a call. It was her father, and he wanted to meet. I thought I was done with them forever, but then her father asked to meet me. If I were as honest, I'd spent years convincing myself my father-in-law didn't care about me one way or the other. He was a quiet man, the kind who never wasted words, and when he did speak, it was usually to back up his wife or keep the peace. But now and then he'd let something slip, small moments I'd almost forgotten until after the divorce, like the time I helped him carry lumber across his property when no one else would lift a finger. He shook my hand afterward, gripping tighter than usual, and said, "You've got grit, son. That matters more than money." I thought it was just politeness back then. But now it feels like something heavier. Or the time he caught me fixing their broken fence during a family barbecue while everyone else laughed inside. He came out, stood there in silence for a while, then gave me the smallest nod, almost like he was saying, "I see you." It wasn't much, but in a family built on appearances, even a nod was more than I ever got from the others. Still, when the divorce was finalized and I walked out of that courthouse with nothing but my clothes and my pride, I assumed I'd never hear from him again. Why would I? I was out of their world. That's why the phone call shocked me. It was late, my apartment dark except for the glow of my phone screen. His voice was low, steady, the same calm tone he always used. "Ryan," he said, "meet me tomorrow. Alone." I froze. My first instinct was suspicion. Was this some kind of trap? Another way to humiliate me? Another chance for his family to remind me how little I mattered? But beneath the suspicion was something else. Curiosity. Because for the first time in years he sounded deliberate. Like a man who wasn't just sitting on the sidelines anymore. I hung up and sat in silence, my mind spinning. Why me? Why now? I had no answers, only questions. And yet, something inside me whispered that I couldn't ignore this meeting. Because maybe, just maybe, the man I thought was powerless. Wasn't powerless at all. I didn't realize the man I thought was powerless had been keeping a secret of his own. I didn't plan on going. God knows I should have stayed home. But sometimes life has a way of forcing you to look your humiliation straight in the eye. The invitation came from a mutual friend, if you can call someone who laughs at your downfall a friend. Freedom party at the mansion. Drinks, music. Celebrate her new life. My ex-wife was hosting E in the house I built with my own hands. That mansion had been my sweat, my weekends, my overtime shifts. I poured concrete with my bare hands, laid tile until my knees bled, and painted every room until I couldn't smell anything but chemicals. It was supposed to be our forever home. Instead, it became her trophy. When I pulled up to the estate, music thundered from inside. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Porsches, Bentleys, a Tesla Model X with gold-trimmed rims. Guests laughed as they strolled through the front doors like royalty entering a palace I'd built. Inside, chandeliers glowed over champagne fountains. Silk curtains swayed in the air conditioning, and hired servers in tuxedos carried trays of hors d'oeuvres. And there she was, my ex-wife, dressed in a sequined gown that shimmered under the lights. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. The moment she spotted me, her lips curved into a smirk. She raised her glass high and shouted across the crowd, "Everyone, a toast!" The music lowered, heads turned, eyes locked on me. "To my fresh start," she declared, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. To prove that sweat doesn't build an empire, it just builds my house. Laughter roared through the room. Some guests clapped, others shook their heads, but all of them stared at me like I was a punchline. My chest burned. My fists clenched. Every brick I had laid, every dollar I had saved, Every night I had sacrificed, it was all being mocked in front of strangers holding crystal glasses filled with $1,000 champagne. I turned to leave, but not fast enough. Phones came out. Clicks, flashes. By the time I reached the door, I already knew the photos would spread online. I stood there in my thrift store jacket while she basked in the glow of millions. By morning, the whole town would see it. I drove home that night with the taste of bitterness in my mouth, humiliation weighing heavier than the steering wheel. I thought I had hit bottom months ago, but this was worse. This was a public execution. And then, as I sat in my dark apartment, the knock came. I opened the door to find him, her father. Hands steady, expression unreadable. No small talk, no pity. Just a plain envelope was held out toward me. "Don't open this until you're ready," he said quietly. And then he turned and walked away. I stood there frozen, the envelope heavy in my hands, knowing my life had just shifted again. That night, her father handed me a plain envelope and said, "Don't open this until you're ready." The envelope sat on my kitchen table all night. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. It felt radioactive, like whatever was inside had the power to change everything or burn me to ash. By morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. My hands trembled as I tore the seal. Inside was a thick stack of papers, neatly clipped together, and a folded handwritten note on old stationery. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her father's. I unfolded the note first. "Ryan didn't deserve what you built. The truth is in here. Use it when you're ready." My stomach twisted. I laid the note down and began flipping through the papers. Property deeds, financial records, copies of contracts I had signed during the marriage, but with one glaring difference. Her name wasn't on most of them. One by one, I recognized the documents. They were tied to the mansion, the land it was built on, and even some side investments I had worked on over the years. All of them traced back to me, only me. And then came the letters. They weren't addressed to me. They were written by my ex-wife to her father. The tone was venomous, cold. Demands for money. Rants about how she deserved more. Lines like, "Ryan's too dumb to realize he's just building my kingdom." My chest tightened as the words sank in. Every insult, every cruel dismissal, every sneer she threw at me in private was spelled out here in ink, proof of what she really thought. But then the real shock came. Tucked between the papers was a second note, this one typed, signed by her father's lawyer. It stated clearly that a large portion of the estate, including the mansion, had never been transferred into her name legally. The divorce judge had been misled. I sat back, the weight of it hitting me like a freight train. She hadn't won. Not really. She might have paraded her freedom party through that mansion, but on paper, on record, it wasn't even hers to flaunt. For the first time in months, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Power. I pressed my palms against the table, staring at the stack of evidence. My ex-wife had humiliated me in front of the world, stolen years of my sweat, and laughed while I drowned. But now I had the weapon to turn it all back on her. My hands were still shaking, but not from fear anymore. From adrenaline. From the fire of knowing the game had just changed. The more I read, the more I realized I wasn't the one who'd lost everything. She was. I thought the first wave of documents was enough to shake me. I was wrong. The deeper I dug into that envelope, the darker the truth became. There were receipts, bank statements, and copies of wire transfers. Some of them were from accounts I didn't even know existed. Offshore banks in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and even one in Dubai. Every transaction told a story, and none of them were clean. At first I didn't understand. Then I found the signatures. Mine, or at least they were supposed to be mine. Sloppy imitations, just close enough to pass at a glance, scrawled on authorizations for property transfers, wire approvals, and settlements. My pulse spiked. She hadn't just taken advantage of the divorce. She had forged my name. And it wasn't just her. Paper after paper showed her mother's fingerprints, too. I found handwritten notes, check stubs with her initials, even one flagged receipt for what looked like a cash payment to a lawyer for expedited settlement favor. The words sent chills down my spine. A bribe. They had bought the outcome of the divorce. Every document stacked higher, heavier, until the truth towered over me like a collapsing building. My ex-wife and her mother hadn't just played the system. They had rewritten it. They manipulated the finances, hid accounts, and convinced the court that the mansion was her inheritance when the evidence proved otherwise. I flipped to one of the last pages and froze. It was the original investment contract for the land the mansion was boo on. My name was the sole investor listed. Every dollar that had gone into that foundation had been mine. Money I earned through years of backbreaking contracting work, late nights, and sacrifice. That house, my house, had never been hers. Not legally, not financially, not by blood or right. For months, I had been walking around broken, telling myself I had lost everything. But sitting there, with papers spread across my kitchen table like puzzle pieces finally clicking together, I realized I hadn't been the loser at all. I had been the mark, the pawn in a scheme so carefully laid out that it nearly destroyed me. And yet, ironically, it was her father who had slipped me the key to undoing it all. My ex-wife thought she had won. She thought she had buried me under the weight of her lies, her wealth, her new life. But these documents, these weren't just papers. They were dynamite, enough to blow her perfect little empire to pieces. I leaned back in my chair, my hands running over my face, adrenaline pounding in my veins. My humiliation was morphing into something sharper, something dangerous. I wasn't powerless anymore. If these papers were real, my ex-wife hadn't just stolen from me. She had committed fraud. I don't even remember the drive over. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, the envelope riding shotgun like a loaded weapon. By the time I pulled up in front of the mansion, my manse on, the one I had poured sweat and years into, my pulse was thundering in my ears. The driveway was lined with cars. Shiny Teslas, BMWs, and a brand-new Maserati. She was hosting another party, flaunting her victory like a trophy. Laughter spilled from the windows as I walked up the marble steps. My chest tightened, but I didn't hesitate. I pushed open the door without knocking. The music, the chatter, it all cut short as heads turned toward me. There she was, standing in the center of it all, glass of champagne in her hand, looking every bit the queen of her stolen castle. "Well, well," she purred, her smile as sharp as glass. "If it isn't the ex-husband. You here to mow the lawn? Or maybe beg for another chance to peek inside the house you used to own?" A few guests chuckled nervously, but I didn't take the bait. My grip tightened on the envelope. "I'm here for the truth." She tilted her head, mock pity dripping from her voice. "Ryan, the court's over. You lost. You can't touch me anymore. So go back to whatever hole you're living in and let the grown-ups enjoy their evening." Her words stung, but this time I didn't flinch. Instead, I stepped closer, laid the envelope on the marble kitchen island, and with one sharp motion, spread the papers out across the glossy surface. "Then explain this," I said. Her smirk faltered. The room grew quiet as her eyes darted across the pages, bank statements, wire transfers, forged signatures, receipts of bribes. I watched her face drain of color, watched her perfect confidence crack. "This is nonsense," she snapped, her voice a little too loud. "Fake documents. You can't prove anything." I slammed my hand down on the counter, the sound echoing through the room. "They're notarized. Every last one. And the originals? Already in safe hands." A ripple went through the crowd, gasps, whispers. People started exchanging glances, some backing away from her as if fraud was contagious. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. For the first time since the divorce, I saw fear in her eyes. Not annoyance, not smug dismissal. Pure, undeniable fear. "You thought you could erase me," I said, my voice steady now, rising above the silence. "You thought you could take everything I built and bury me under your lies. But the truth doesn't stay buried." Her champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the floor. The sound seemed to puncture the tension in the room. Every eye locked on her. And then, just as she finally opened her mouth to speak, the door behind me creaked open. Heavy footsteps crossed the polished floor. I turned, my heart pounding. And then her father walked in behind me, saying words that silenced the room. The room was dead silent when her father stepped in. He wasn't dressed like the rest of them. No tailored suit, no silk tie. Just a gray cardigan and slacks, like he'd been dragged out of his study. but his presence carried more weight than all the luxury cars in the driveway combined. He looked at me first, then at the spread of papers across the marble island. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to his daughter, his pride and joy. "Dad, don't listen to him," she blurted, her voice cracking. "He's bitter. He's making things up." Her father raised his hand and the room went still again. Quiet. The single word landed like a gavel. He walked forward slowly, picking up one of the documents. His brow furrowed as he read, then he sighed, long and heavy, like a man who'd carried a secret for too long. "This house," he said finally, his voice steady, "wasn't hers to take. It wasn't even hers to claim." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" He turned his gaze on her, sharp as a blade. "The truth. I financed Ryan's business when it was nothing but sketches on a napkin. My investments, my collateral, my backing, without me, there wouldn't be a company, and without the company, there wouldn't be this mansion." Murmurs spread through the guests. She shook her head, desperate. "No, you always supported me." "I supported us," he cut in. "I believed in Ryan because I saw his grit. I knew he could build something real, and he did. You used his sweat and my money to carve out your little empire, then tried to erase the one man who made it possible." Her lips trembled. For once, no clever retort came. He placed the documents back down and looked straight at me. "Ryan, you have my full support, legally, financially, whatever it takes." My throat tightened. For years, I thought this man was nothing but a shadow at family dinners, a silent presence while his wife and daughter belittled me. But now, he was standing in my corner when it mattered most. "Lawson and Associates are already drafting the case," he continued, turning to the crowd. "Fraud charges will be filed. If you stand with lies, you'll go down with them. If you stand with the truth, stay." One by one, guests exchanged glances. Some left quietly. Others stayed rooted, watching the drama unfold like a courtroom scene. She stumbled back, eyes wild. "You can't do this. I'm your daughter." His voice cracked just slightly as he answered. "And you betrayed not just your husband but your own father. You'll face the consequences of that." The papers between us felt like dynamite, ready to blow apart every illusion she'd built. But he warned me, taking her down would mean destroying every lie she'd ever built. It didn't take long. Within weeks, the court reopened the divorce case, something I never thought possible. The new evidence hit like a wrecking ball. Forged signatures, hidden accounts, even receipts tying her mother to bribes slipped to my former lawyer. The judge didn't smile, didn't flinch. He simply read the evidence aloud, piece by piece, until the courtroom air was thick with humiliation. My ex-wife sat there in her designer dress, trembling. The confidence she'd once flaunted like a crown was gone, stripped bare in front of the same community that had once toasted her new life. Her mother tried to object, her voice shrill, but the judge cut her off. "Silence. You are implicated as well." Gasps rippled through the gallery. By the end of the hearing, the ruling was clear. The mansion, the cars, and every account tied to fraudulent transfers were to be seized and restored. The home I had built with years of sweat and sacrifice, once paraded online as her trophy, was awarded back to me. Reporters were waiting on the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward. She shielded her face, no longer the glamorous queen of the mansion, but a disgraced fraud whose empire had crumbled overnight. Her friends, the same ones who clinked champagne glasses at her freedom party, scattered like shadows. Social invites vanished. Business partners pulled back, and even family kept their distance. She was radioactive, and me? I stood there on the marble steps, not with arrogance, but with something else. Peace. I wasn't just the man who lost everything anymore. I was the man who had fought back and won. The first night I walked through the mansion again, it didn't feel real. The chandeliers still sparkled, the marble floors still gleamed, but the rooms echoed with emptiness. No party chatter, no fake smiles, no mocking laughter. Just silence. I wandered from room to room, running my hands along the walls I had built, the staircases I had polished with sweat, the windows I had framed with my own 2 hands. It was all mine again. But for the first time, I wasn't sure that mattered, Standing in the center of that empty living room, I realized the truth. But standing in that empty mansion, I realized the victory wasn't the house, it was something else. When the dust finally settled, I thought reclaiming the mansion would feel like victory. But as I stood in those gilded halls, I realized it wasn't the house I had won back, it was myself. The betrayal had nearly broken me. I had been stripped of dignity, of security, of every dream I thought I had built. But in that darkness I discovered something deeper. Truth. And truth, unlike marble floors or luxury cars, can never be stolen. I could have lived in that $8 million mansion again, but I didn't. I restored it, cleaned it of the lies that had been poured into its walls, and rented it out. Let someone else fill it with their laughter. I chose a modest home instead, smaller, humbler, but filled with peace. With the settlement funds, I did something greater. I started a foundation for divorced fathers, men who, like me, had been stripped bare and told they were worthless. I wanted them to know what I learned, that rock bottom isn't the end. It can be the beginning. The last time I opened the envelope her father gave me, I read his letter again, his handwriting shaky but firm. "You've got grit, son. That matters more than money." I closed it, held it to my chest, and whispered into the silence, "Thank you." Because in the end, it wasn't the mansion that set me free. It was the courage to face betrayal, the will to fight back, and the choice to build something honest from the ashes of lies. What would you do if your ex took your $8M mansion and left you with nothing, but one envelope could destroy her lies? For more stories of betrayal, revenge, and redemption, subscribe now.